All right, we started the show talking a lot about the Eagles itch that I needed scratching because yesterday all it took was some guys in shorts and pads running around in South Philadelphia, and I got excited by it. This portion of the show is brought to you by Rite Aid, your neighborhood pharmacy. Zach Berman has young kids, and when you go away with kids, JP, you'll always forget something as well as you pack. So like if you're down the shore and you need some last minute sunscreen, sunglasses, whatever it may be, allergy relief, you can catch up on immunizations for RSV, shingles, and more. Walk in or schedule a vaccine appointment at riteaid.com. All right, I had an Eagles itch, and I said, Zach, I need you. You were there yesterday. Zach, I got excited. This is our last little dosage of football for the next 6 weeks or so. You don't get much, so let's preface all the conversations we're about to have with it is just OTAs. It's the first installment for a lot of these guys. What were your major takeaways from being down there yesterday? I listened to you and Bo a little bit yesterday. I know the quarterbacks didn't have a great day, yada, yada, yada. Who cares? What was your big takeaway?
Yeah, what you just referenced was if you isolate yesterday's practice, that's what jumped out is the quarterbacks did not have a banner day. And when you're in these settings, whether it's OTA, whether it's training camp, it's kind of this age-old question. Was the offense performing poorly or was the defense performing well? And I would say that the discouraging part was that you didn't come away yesterday thinking the quarterbacks are particularly efficient in practice. The other side is that the secondary played really well, and in particular, Isaiah Rodgers. And I know Isaiah Rodgers has been a subject of fascination for Eagles fans really for the past year since they signed him when he had the gambling suspension. I kind of muted my expectations because he hadn't played in a year. I can tell you, having seen him only for 2 practices in shorts and shells, that there's a reason to be intrigued here. Right, he looked the part yesterday. To paint the picture for the viewers and the listeners, he had an interception on. It was like a play when it was a 3rd and 6, backed up on the 5-yard line. A situation Nick Sirianni kind of emphasized, and Hurts threw a slant to A.J. Brown, and Isaiah Rodgers jumps the route, gets the pick. If it was in a game, it would have been a pick 6. Showed instincts, showed ball skills, and like it's the type of play that you see against a Pro Bowl quarterback defending an all-pro receiver, and it jumped out and said, all right, there really might be something here with Isaiah Rodgers.
Yeah, he was an analytics darling in his last year in Indy there, so could be a brilliant Howie move. Now, Zach, it leads right into what I think is going to be a tremendous camp battle. I mean, Kenyon Mitchell probably had the expectation of being the cornerback 2 when they spend a first-round draft pick on him. But it appears that Isaiah Rodgers might give him a little bit of a battle here in camp. How good of a situation did this become for the cornerback 2 position for the Eagles?
Yeah, it's night and day from the beginning of the offseason. When you looked at it, James Bradberry, who's still on the roster, I don't know how much longer.
Well, June 1st is almost here.
Yeah, June 1st is tomorrow, and so we'll see what happens with Bradberry. But to land Mitchell, the top corner in the draft from the Eagles' estimation, right? They drafted him before any other cornerback in the draft. And then Isaiah Rodgers, who was really a lottery ticket signing for them. And he's showing promise. And like you said, it's not like he's a no-name. Started 10 games for the Colts over 3 seasons, has speed. He's longer, or he's bigger than I expected. You keep hearing maybe he profiles in the slot. No, he can play on the outside. And then the other one I'll say is that Keely Ringo. I would not sleep on Keely Ringo. Keely Ringo, who's younger than Mitchell, was the youngest one on the team last year, was a surprise 4th-round pick in 2023. There were thoughts that he was going to be in the first 2 rounds, and he looks the part too. And he played with more confidence later last season. Yesterday's practice, he made a really good play on the ball down the field. So between those, and then you add in Cooper DeJean also.
Sure.
Right? They at this time last year, even with Slay and Bradberry, their top backup on the outside was Josh Jobe. Wow. Now you have 4 guys who could potentially start for you. That's a good situation for the Eagles.
And the other part that's given me a little bit of excitement here as we hit pause in the coming weeks for training camp and for the season, frankly, is Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. You talk about the secondary upgrades there. I mean, when you talk about coordinator upgrades from, frankly, the unprovenness of Sean Desai and Brian Johnson last year, I think there's a reason to be excited about the coaching staff, which I didn't think I was going to say back in January, Zach. Any major takeaways, anything you noticed with Vic and Kellen Moore yesterday in terms of newness, freshness, any different looks we might see going into the year? What were your takeaways from what you saw from those two guys?
Yeah, when they hired Kellen Moore, a big talking point was the use of motion and kind of what they would do before the snap. And obviously, they're not showing much right now, but you are seeing, I would say, creativity or at least something different, so, a little bit of spice, if you will, before the snap, right? And even in the individual drills, there was an individual drill with the running backs and the quarterbacks where the running backs are lining up in the slot, and then they motion behind the quarterback, and then they're running almost like a read option type play with the running back next to the quarterback there. And so you saw Saquon doing that, right? A.J. Brown was lining up in the slot quite a bit yesterday, and I think you'll see him motion from the outside inside. And sometimes it might not be a motion. It might just be a shift, but ways to kind of manipulate the coverage, get the matchups you want. And I think, I use the cross-sport analogy. When you watch
I love cross-sport analogies. I'm not Bo, Zach. Bring them on.
Yeah, so when you watch the Mavs play, one thing that they do an incredible job of is like they'll get the matchup on Luka that they want every single time, right? And in the NFL, you can try to do that with your wide receivers, with your skill players. That's what you do before the snap. You can move those guys to isolate them in a certain matchup.
Chiefs versus the Eagles in the Super Bowl.
Well said. Exactly. So I think you'll see a little bit more of that this season instead of kind of the approach of my guys versus your guys. My guys will try to beat your guys.
A+ answer. That's what I wanted to hear. I think that, the biggest problem with the offense last year was it became really boring and predictable, and there was no creativity. And Kellen Moore has a track record. He's had success in this league. So that should be really exciting. All right, Zach, I will admit I was a sucker. I became a fan of somebody yesterday because he pulled at my parental heartstrings. We'll talk about the wide receiver 3 position, being an issue, frankly, after you bullied Devontae Parker out of town. But John Ross yesterday, I thought had the coolest answer of the day. Obviously, coming out of high school, one of the biggest recruits in the country, one of the fastest kids coming out, combine records for speed, all that, never translated to success on the field. He kind of said, I have a new perspective on life. My son inspires me. I stepped away from the game. I coached him up. I found a new meaning of life. Really hard not to root for this kid all of a sudden.
Yeah, well said. And it's interesting, too, because the context of him being a former top 10 pick, right? You saw the humility, like the appreciation for the situation he's in.
Yeah.
To put this in perspective for the viewers and the listeners, John Ross, he was not just like signed off the street. He had to try out for the team. He went to rookie minicamp trying out for the team. This is a guy who was a top 10 pick. And yeah, his press conference yesterday, he was really emphasizing. So he retired last year. He was with the Chiefs. He retired last year. He said he had some things in his personal life he had to
said he was in a dark place. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's tough when, we talk about these guys. I say we, the media, fans, whatever it may be, almost like, they're just names on a sheet of paper. And so when you're drafted in the top 10, number 9 overall, right, there's expectations that always follow you. When you run a 4.22 240 at the combine, there are expectations that always follow you. So when you don't meet them, or when you're kind of labeled like this underachiever, and sometimes it's for reasons out of your control, injuries, whatever,
sure.
A situation, whatever it may be, it lingers with you. And so that's so John Ross was out of football last year, hasn't played since 2021, but was completely out of the sport last year. Back home with his son, now 7 years old, Kyrie, coaching him up, and like they had time together. And the thing too that I think is important for like people who kind of aren't on the inside to understand is that most of these players, or a lot of these players, are away from their families throughout the season. Like their families have a home base somewhere else, and the players are here in Philly, and then they during the offseason is kind of when they get to spend time with their loved ones. Unless you're like a guy who's cemented in a given situation, you're a transit. You might not know if you're in Philly beyond 4 months, right?
Sure.
So that's the way it's been for a lot of these players. So John Ross got that last year, but then, like you would imagine, I have a 6-year-old son turned 7 in 2 weeks. They get the football bug too. So John Ross's son wants to know, what's going on in meeting, how practices were.
How's
He
Jalen
actually
Hurts? Is he
said,
cool, Dad?
yeah. So John Ross said that his son, the second team he wanted to join was the Eagles. It was number 2 on the list.
That's
Number
great.
1 was the Ravens because of Lamar Jackson. And my son was playing Madden all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like trading for, Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes. Like I can understand that well.
Yeah, I kind of like the Ravens as an organization personally. So I think he's got good taste, that kid. Zach, now 2 of the guys that kind of made headlines yesterday just from their physical appearances, and both are extremely important roles on the Eagles all of a sudden. Nolan Smith looked pretty jacked up, and Jordan Davis talked about how this was a goal of the offseason to lose weight, to come in better shape, down 25 pounds. Said he's one with nature. He's going for hikes and all of this. What did you make of, because we've seen Scott Kingery get jacked up and not translate into a good baseball player, to the cross-sport reference. Do you make anything of it? It's obviously just a baby step in the right direction, but Nolan Smith's has a huge opportunity this year, and Jordan Davis is pretty critical to the Eagles' success here.
Yeah, I think the Jordan Davis part of it is important. On our show last fall, Brian Baldinger was saying that he thought Jordan Davis was out of shape. Jordan Davis was north of 350 last year. To give you a perspective, he's listed by the Eagles as 336, I think, right? So he was north of 350. Now, when you're 6'6", you can wear it well.
Sure.
But he's at 350 now. 6'6", 350 is probably a good range for him. And that's kind of always been a question with Jordan Davis, is that when he's right, he can be dominant player or just like an athletic physical force that is almost unprecedented in the NFL when you look at the athletic testing for that size. But if he's out of shape, he's not taking the amount of snaps. He might be prone to injuries in those situations, or harder to recover from injuries. So that's important, is where he is weight-wise. Nolan Smith played last year at 238. He's at 245 now. That's kind of his build. It's similar to Hassan Reddick, right? I don't think that it's whatever weight he's comfortable with. I think with Nolan Smith, it's more refining the technical aspects of it. I'm not as kind of caught up in where he is size-wise. Now, you can always get stronger, right? And he is on the lighter side, but you also don't want him to lose any of that athleticism either. So I look at it like the Jordan Davis part of it is probably more important to me physically than the Nolan Smith part of it.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Now, to circle back on the wide receiver conversation, it was nice to throw some bouquets at John Ross there. But after you bullied Devontae Parker out of town, Zach, the wide receiver 3 position. Look, when you pay Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown top of the market type of money, you're not going to have a lot left for the rest of the wide receiving core. Paris Campbell is a guy that, look, Quez Watkins had better numbers in a single season than Paris Campbell has ever had. How big of a problem do you perceive this wide receiver 3 position being? And is the wide receiver 3 on opening day on this roster yet?
Yeah, great questions, because I think that is probably one of the 3 biggest needs I would identify going into training camp, and maybe the biggest. And you can look at it a few different ways. Wide receiver 3 is the 5th option in the passing game, right? Behind AJ, Devontae, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley. But it's still a role on the field, right? Still someone you need to account for. And the other thing we saw in week 18 last year, when Devontae was down for the first time, how that affects the offense. And then AJ goes down the first half of that game, and it really affected the offense. Then you see in the playoffs last year when AJ was down, and it looked like 2021 all over again, or 2021 all over again, where it's kind of like Devontae and Goddard, and that's it. So it's a big question. Now they'll look at their internal options, and Paris Campbell, if he's healthy, this is a former second round pick, someone the Eagles really liked. He had production 2 years ago, his last year with the Colts, but he hasn't been able to be consistently productive. John Ross is just a lottery ticket at this point. We'll see.
Yeah.
They'll look at Anaya Smith or Johnny Wilson. They're 2 draft picks, but that's a 5th and 6th round pick. And Bo did a good job on our show earlier this week outlining how 5th and 6th round picks in Eagles history, like Mac Hollins has been the most productive, like 3rd round pick on in the past decade. And that was like 20 catches or thereabouts. Typically you're looking in the like 5 to 15 catch range there. They have some guys on future deals that they like, Joseph Ngata being one of them. And then Britton Covey's returning. But I think they can and should scan the market here, see what's available in the trade market. Free agency is a bit bare right now, unless you think you can rejuvenate Michael Thomas. I don't know if free agency is the route, but what you might see during camp in particular, and that's when some of these trades happen.
The cornerback trades,
it's kind of actually the inverse of what happened in 2017.
Yeah.
In 2017, the Eagles looked at their depth chart and they're like, we're deeper at wide receiver than we've been in a long time. So Jordan Matthews is suddenly expendable because Nelson Aguilar is coming on in the slot, but they really needed help at corner. This year, I think they can look at it and say they're deeper at corner than they've been in a long time. Maybe someone like Eli Ricks could be traded, and you look for a team that has a surplus of wide receivers and someone who can fit in to that 3rd spot. So look, Howie's not taking advice from me, but I think if he were to ask me what I would look at this summer, I would think that's one of them. And then I would probably ask him to let me know about it first too.
I completely agree. I think it's a position that can become upgradable. I think you're spot on with the cornerback thing there. Now, Zach, one of the easy things to kind of overlook here is the Eagles lost 2 stalwarts of leadership in that locker room last year that you can't just thumb over and say it's easy to replace. Forget even on the field, a Jason Kelce and a Fletcher Cox in that locker room. Now, BG is back basically to not lose 3/4 of the perceived leaders. You have Lane Johnson and BG here now, but it does kind of open the door for that next generation. You know, Slay talked about training the young guys. I thought his answer was awesome. Who do you perceive as, like, if you had a Mount Rushmore of kind of like leaders in the locker room? Yeah. Obviously Lane and BG are still there. Who are the guys you see stepping up into those other 2 spots? Is it a Jalen Hurts? Is it somebody else that we don't even know about yet?
Yeah. So, I'm going to circle back to the first part of the question after, but to answer this succinctly, I would say it has to start with Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts has those leadership qualities.
Absolutely,
now, he kind of imposes his identity, which is fine. Like it's like an all business, no BS approach. And I think there's value in that. I think Devontae and Landon Dickerson and Jordan Mailata and AJ Brown. I think Jordan Mailata in particular is someone you can really look at there. And I think he can step in to a bigger role in that capacity. On defense, Nakobe Dean, someone that has some of those qualities. Now he needs to be on the field playing.
Sure.
He was kind of the alpha of those great Georgia defenses, and I really think that's something he could be. Still getting to know some of these other, some of these younger guys. I think when they drafted Sidney Brown, they thought he could morph into that type of personality for them. But I really think it starts with Jalen Hurts. And to the first part of the question, it's a good point. I've been asked this a lot, like in conversations or even interviews throughout the offseason about replacing the leadership of Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox. And I get it, and it's a valid question, but you kind of referenced it. I think that what they're going to miss the most about those guys is like their ability on the field.
Sure.
I think the locker room part of it kind of gets overstated. When you're a good team, leaders emerge. When you're a bad team, you need leadership. I'm not taking anything away from Jason or Fletcher. They stumbled down the stretch last year with both those guys in the locker room for like legitimate football reasons,
Sure.
right? And so I think that what they missed the most from those guys is a Hall of Famer, a potential Hall of Famer, and it's hard to replace that. If they're a good team, the leadership part of it will sort itself out.
Yeah, to me, like the culture is good enough there that it's not like a worry. But to me, the leadership is in the film room. You know what I mean? When Jason Kelsey's working with the Cam Jurgens and some of these younger guys and showing them things that he's learned over all that year. I don't think it's like a rah-rah speech thing. I think it's as Darius Slay alluded to, showing these young guys how to do it and what they've learned and being sponges. So like, I guess that's more what I mean than like, keeping everybody in line and giving rah-rah speeches. It's imparting their wisdom on this next generation of Eagles because they are kind of turning a chapter here in terms of the youth movement.
In a big way. And like the faces of the franchise are changing too. And I thought, when the Eagles lost Malcolm Jenkins, I say lost, when the Eagles let Malcolm Jenkins go is a better way of framing it. After the 2019 season, one of the things was like they wanted Carson to kind of take over. And I don't think it was as clean as it needed to be there. And so I think Jalen's obviously a different personality. Jalen likes to say that leaders lead because their peers let them lead. And there's validity to that. Like when Jalen Hurts, his leadership is going to come from watching the way he works, watching the way he acts. And if you want to be led, you're going to follow that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Zach, we had a unfortunate text incident on my end today. I texted you ZACK instead of ZACH, which is a big no-no in the Zach world.
Yes.
Now my phone, I'm a Google keyboard swipe texter. It autocorrects to Zach with a K because of Zach Wheeler, because I type him so much. Zach Bond is a guy that is screwing up your keyboard in the Zach world, but he is a guy that is getting reps with the one. He's a Vic Fangio, kind of mold player of Van Ginkel. I hear everybody make the comps too. Zach Bond, what can we expect? Do you think he is ready to step into a starting linebacker job week 1 in Brazil?
Yeah, when it's still odd to hear week 1 in Brazil when something like that. Zach Bond, when the Eagles signed him, I was expecting more along the lines of a situational edge rusher who can kind of help on the inside at times. Frankly, based on what he said when he signed, I think that's the way he wanted to be used. Then Vic Fangio says at his press conference earlier this month that Zach Bond was the first name he mentioned for off-ball linebacker. These 2 OTAs we watched, Zach Bond's with the first team at off-ball linebacker. So I think he could be someone who moves to both those spots, inside and outside. His skill set, in my opinion, has lended more to edge rusher, but his size probably fits more on the inside. If he can help in both those areas, it's a plus for the Eagles. If he can give them depth on the inside, some pass rush skills on the outside, I think he's very much in the mix. And I think part of the story here is they're not giving Nakobe Dean this job. Like Nakobe Dean has to earn this job.
Yeah.
And a year ago, a year ago they cleared the deck for Nakobe Dean to be the guy at linebacker. They didn't make any meaningful moves before training camp at the position because they had that confidence in Nakobe Dean being the guy. Going into year 3, they still need to figure out what they have in Dean. And I think Bond, certainly Devin White there. They have Oren Burks, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. But in particular, Bond and White are like I think the Eagles would start those guys if they're not happy with Dean right now.
You think Devin White, was he also getting ones as well yesterday? Sorry if I missed that.
White.
There.
Yeah,
Okay.
White and Bond have been the consistent guys with the ones. Now, Dean's recovering from a foot injury. And
no need to rush him. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't do 7-on-7s 2 weeks ago. Yesterday he mixed in a little more. If I had to bet, I would still say it's going to be Dean starting. And I like Dean when they came out. I'll be consistent with it. But I don't like when it's year 3 and you don't know what you have with the player yet.
Yeah, it's unfortunately he feels Avonte Maddox-ish. Unfortunately, just a guy that could be a good player that can just never stay healthy. But to your point, we still don't know what he is. Zach, thank you for scratching my Eagles itch today. All it takes is some guys running around the field at the NovaCare complex, and I start to feel it again. It's going to be, I think, the most exciting training camp in a while, not from terms of expectations, but from terms of camp battles and thing to watch. And I think it should be a really exciting year. You and Bo at 12 o'clock today?
Yeah, we're at 12. I'm sorry, 12 o'clock playing. Tick Zach Bo is the name of the game. We have some fun categories to explore,
Nice.
and then next week, 3 days of mandatory minicamp for the Eagles. So we'll be out there with our. We'll have shows each day telling you what's happening on the practice field, and then some good content coming up. Well, on now and then also coming up on allphly.com. So. I know I'm not doing the ad reads here, but it pays to be a diehard, so you can read the exclusive content.
Yeah, it is great stuff. And Zach, have a great weekend with the family, and I'll see you next week.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jamie.
All right. See you, Zach.
We all silly like the mayor.